As usual, our first and most favorite order of business is our Green Themes presentation, this evening presented by Kelsey Dillon from the Township Department of Parks and Recreation, speaking to us about vernal pools and invasive species. Looking forward to it.
Dillon. I am the Stewardship Coordinator for Meridian Township. I work out of the Parks and Recreation office. And I have a really awesome job, and I love talking about it. So I'm really excited to give you this presentation today. I'm going to go through mostly what we've done so far this year in 2017, as far as a lot of our great volunteer projects, our stewardship projects, maybe give you like a brief overview of kind of what our plan is as far as natural area management, which is really kind of what my job is. It breaks down into natural area management and how to engage the community in that natural area management. So we'll get started here with a quick introduction. So I guess, what is stewardship? A lot of people say you're a stewardship coordinator. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it's basically just maintaining and in a lot of cases also restoring our natural air, the quality of our natural resources. So Meridian Township, we're very lucky. We have over 1,400 acres of protected natural areas between the parks and land preservation programs. So, you know, when you think of parks, you might think of our soccer fields or our playgrounds, but a lot of the parks are, natural area. We don't have anything built on them, and the land preserves are all natural area. So it's kind of my job to maintain those areas and kind of go through, look at them, see how we can even improve the quality of them. And community engagement and education really is key in that, because there are a lot of acres, as you can see here. They're in neighborhoods, people's houses back up to them. So it's really important that we make the community aware of these natural areas, how they can help best protect them, and also just getting volunteers and student groups out into these areas. So I guess natural area management, why do we manage these areas is a question that I get a lot. It's a natural area. Can't you just put a fence up and kind of leave it type of, that's a question a lot of people have. And our goal is to restore the ecosystem function and ecosystem health. So a lot of these areas I know the one in the picture you see up here with the massive buckthorn, that was a parking lot at some point. So a lot of these areas are highly disturbed, so they have grown back with non-native invasive species, and that's a really big issue. Invasive species form these really dense monocultures. They completely outcompete most of our native species. That picture we took before we took down all of that buckthorn. Buckthorn's a shrub, by the way. You could see how tall those are. They're like 30 feet tall. It likes to go in tree form in this particular preserve, but so really our goal is to go in, monitor these invasives, take them out and replace them with native species, because non-natives, they create monocultures and lower biodiversity, and biodiversity is a very important indicator of our ecosystem health. So that's just something that we're constantly aware of. So in the bottom you can see some kids collecting some garlic mustard. That's another one that's pretty, can just form these huge vast monocultures. And a lot of these invasive species have these little special adaptations, such as garlic mustard puts like chemicals that inhibit other tree growth, other forb growth in the ground. Buckthorn completely shades out everything under it, even its own seedlings. So a lot of times they're not even good for themselves. And they're definitely not good for any of our native plant species. And then it follows that, then we don't get as many we don't get biodiversity in our insects, we don't get biodiversity in our mammals. So really it's this cascading effect of we need to kind of create biodiversity on that level, the plant level, to create biodiversity throughout the entire ecosystem. So that's really kind of what natural area management is around here, is we would love to just let these natural areas kind of, sit there, and if they could stay pristine, but we just have so much human interaction around them that we're bringing in non-natives, we're cutting down trees and letting buckthorn and autumn olive and all these invasive shrubs grow up. So we do really need to get in and actively manage a lot of our natural areas in the township. I wish it was the other way. I wish we could just leave them, but so another one of my jobs is just some very active management in these areas. So that kind of leads me into how we're doing community engagement. Most of my presentation will be kind of on some volunteer projects and community engagement projects, but if anybody has any technical questions about how we're actively monitoring, please at any point raise your hand, interrupt me. I'm really kind of flexible on my presentation style, so if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to ask. If you have any technical questions, feel free to ask. So I'll start with a program we started this year, the Michigan Natural Features Inventory Vernal Pool Monitoring Program. This is in place in a few other places in Michigan, but it did not have a place in central Michigan until this year. This is throughout all of Ingham County. It's working with Ingham County Parks, Mid-Michigan Stewardship Network, Red Cedar Wild Ones and Meridian Township were the main contributors. We hosted a lot of the events here and at Lake Lansing North. And we had 55 participants come out, which was really exciting, about vernal pools. And vernal pools are just these small temporal wetlands that actually house a lot of biodiversity. And we have, they're very vital breeding grounds. And because they are only wet certain areas of the year, they don't have a lot of protection under the wetland laws in Michigan. So they can come under, it could be dry most of the year, but you have fairy shrimp eggs that are under the leaves that are just waiting for it to get wet again in the spring. And then we have fairy shrimp in Michigan. Who knew? I was really excited when we first saw them. We found them on a lot of our properties. So one of the biggest things we did was we asked MNFI, the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, to map all vernal pools. And they do that by taking GIS map overlays and looking for certain patterns. So they mapped over 100 potential vernal pools, and we are actually still in the process of going through, checking them out. Right now, our volunteer groups around this time are going back to the areas. They went and visited in the spring twice, and then they visit right around now to make sure that the pool dries. Because a lot of these, basically a vernal pool differs from a pond by the absence of fish. So a lot of amphibians, such as this salamander, frogs, they breed in these pools because they don't have to worry about fish predation, because fish obviously need it to be wet year-round. So these vernal pools are just super important breeding grounds, and they need to be mapped to be protected. So that was our first order of business. Is our volunteers went out. We had a couple come back and say there was no, there's no wet area there, but a lot of them came back and said, hey, we found it. We found the indicator species. We found some fairy shrimp. Those are kind of the most notable indicator species in the vernal pools. So we were really excited. So right now the volunteer groups, I've gotten a few forms in. We're going to send all that back to MNFI, and they're going to send us a report back on kind of what they've found. And this is a long-term monitoring effort. So a lot of these volunteer groups will be at it next year, and then maybe we can start getting some data on where these vernal pools are. They want to know how far away, housing developments are from them. Does that affect it in any way? So they're asking all these really important questions, and our volunteers here in Meridian Township are helping collect that data. So it's this massive citizen science project. Yeah.
That sounds absolutely fantastic.
Yes.
How did we come to know of these vernal pools, or how did they come to our attention in the township?
Yeah, so we have a board, a member on our Land Preservation Advisory Board, which is who I go to all the Land Preservation Advisory Board meetings. Her name was Yuman Lee, and she is a scientist with MNFI, and she and a representative from the Mid-Michigan Stewardship Network, Leslie Kuhn, got together at a meeting, and they were discussing it and said, wouldn't this be so cool to bring together in Ingham County? And so between the Mid-Michigan Stewardship Network's connections through Ingham and our connections with Ingham County, with Wild Ones, they stepped up and put in some money. So then we all pulled together some fundraising money, and we were able to hire MNFI to do this monitoring. So it's really just all these groups coming together, discussing something at a conference, and then saying, what if? So, and then we were able to get it together and launch it. We held the big presentation right here, and we had 55 people come out, which was really exciting. And we have some groups monitoring, a ton of groups are monitoring at Lake Lansing North, which is the land preservation property that we manage with Ingham County, and that one is just full of vernal pools. Any other questions about vernal pools?
Yes, I have another one.
Yeah.
And how were we able to secure the funding?
The land preservation program made a donation that put forward funds. The Mid-Michigan Stewardship Network, Ingham County Parks, and Red Cedar Wild Ones all put together funds. So, yep. Yep, all the boards, voted to put funds toward that. We gave presentations, and they loved the idea. So really, it was just everyone kind of chipping in together, putting in some stewardship dollars, and we made it happen. So hopefully we can continue that project next year, because the volunteers really loved it, and we loved doing it. I love fairy shrimp. They're so cool.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Is it, was the survey only done on publicly owned land, or is there any private?
There were a few private people that private landowners that came out, and we did allow, we gave them monitoring kits. Basically, some of the funding bought little kits, buckets, glass, little magnifying glasses, water sampling instruments, and we gave that out, and they monitored as long as they were in Ingham County. And we're collecting that data between myself and Leslie Kuhn at the Mid-Michigan Stewardship Network, so we're compiling all that.
You're going to have a picture of one of those fairy shrimp in here?
I don't have a picture of the fairy shrimp in here. They're so cool, though. Go home and Google them. They're amazing. I would suggest doing a video. They're actually kind of big. You'd expect. I kind of was like, there's no way there's shrimp in here. We went out somewhere, and Umon dipped a net. Sure enough, there were fairy shrimp. I would suggest looking up a video of them, because they're really cool. They kind of go around on their back. Any other questions? Yeah.
Will the mapping be made like public and everything?
Yeah, we can definitely, maybe once our website's kind of up and running. I think what MNFI, their goal is to have it to where it's easier for citizen stewards to report their findings. So right now, what they're doing is filling out hard copies. They mail them to me, and I give that information to MNFI, and they enter it. So right now, they're trying to streamline that into a website. So I'm sure that website will be publicly accessible, and we will make, those maps accessible as we learn and kind of go through and check this one off as one and this one not one. So, and it's also helping improve their methods, because they're doing this across these vast, mostly in the Upper Peninsula, they're doing the mapping. And so by having volunteers that can go double check, oh, maybe like when this looks like this, it's not really a vernal pool. So we're also helping them with their mapping techniques. Any other vernal pool questions before we move on? You are? Aren't they so cool? It's incredible. The first time we did it, we did the training over at Lake Lansing North. We did, you dip your net in and you put it in a clear Tupperware, and it was amazing. The videos just of how much life are in those pools. It's incredible. We were out, it was pouring rain. You can tell everyone's in raincoats, and it's kind of chilly, and we're like, there's no way there's things living in these tiny ponds, and there they are. Just everything is moving. It's incredible just how many species are in there, and then seeing wood frog eggs and salamander eggs and learning how to differentiate that. We had a lot of, we were a little worried that our volunteers would, but they were all up to it. They were all excited, ready to go, so we were really fortunate to have such dedicated volunteers in this program. Any other vernal pool questions? Okay, we'll move on. Oh, yeah.
So you talked about invasives in terms of land plants, but in the vernal pools, I mean, one difficulty with water is, of course, at least any chemical strategy used for treating things can be spread around and so forth. So are there standard, for example, reed canary grass, things like that, are there standard tools you can use for this wet, or at least sometimes wet context?
Yeah, definitely. So overall, which I was very surprised about, this is one of the first things I asked Umon, who's done a lot of the lead work on monitoring these vernal pools. There are not that many invasive species in the vernal pools. She's got a lot of mostly land plants, autumn olive kind of encroaching. I know our one at Lake Lansing North had some autumn olive kind of coming up behind it. But overall, there are not a lot of the water-loving invasive species that we would see in a wetland in these vernal pools, which is very fortunate. So as long as we can kind of keep the autumn olive back using, we obviously want to use, don't want to use any chemicals that aren't water safe or anything like that. So again, that's one of the parts about why it's so important to locate and define the edges of these pools, is so that we can understand where we're treating these land species, invasive species, making sure we're not impacting anything in the vernal pool. Yeah. But yeah, no, overall, I was also surprised. I was like, oh, do you have, reed canary grass? Do you have Phragmites? What do you have grow? And they're like, actually not that much. Maybe it's the, the seasonality of the water being present, that maybe the autumn olive can't take it being wet that long, and the reed canary grass can't take it being dry that long. But overall, she said a surprising lack of invasives, which is good.
Yeah,
We can't
yeah.
say that for a lot of areas. Yeah. Anything else? Oh yeah, I'll move on to another one of the biggest and pretty much one of the main projects I work on. This is Tower Woods Land Preserve. So this is one of our preserves in the northwestern part of Meridian Township over by the Walnut Hills Golf Course. It's over 100-acre land preserve, and this is the one that was a parking lot for the golf course for a very long time, and they let it go for about 25 years. So obviously a lot of buckthorn grew up. Buckthorn is a pretty nasty invasive shrub. It can get to very large heights. It's multi-stems, so it can get very thick, very difficult to control once it gets that established in the seed bank. So what we've been doing out here is mostly invasive species removal. So whether that's, you can see a couple different ways we've been doing it, push behind brush hog, which we just did again this summer. We have some major equipment out there in areas. And what we always like to do in this while we're doing it is make sure we're not harming any native tree species. We try to avoid, we go out with Jim Kilbasso comes out with us. We have other foresters that come out and help us mark off valuable trees, because basically all we're trying to do is kill back these buckthorn and other invasive species. We have some autumn olive and honeysuckle out there as well, but mostly buckthorn, until we can get some tree regeneration, and that's where I can bring volunteers in. So what we've done is we've gone through and we are cutting down all the buckthorn, and we are planting native hardwood species out there. We're using a very diverse mix of oaks, maple, tulip poplar. We're using a ton of different species out there. We even have some black gum, swamp white oak. We have a lot of tree species out there to kind of avoid any future blights or borers or anything. We have a lot of dead ash out here, unfortunately, as well. So that's just creating all these opportunities for these invasives to grow up in their place. But luckily we have a way to try to fight that by knocking back the buckthorn and planting a lot of these trees. In the bottom right, you can see those blue tubes. The other thing that we often have to fight are deer. Deer love our little trees. So what we do is we use these blue X tubes, and they are little tree protectors that we put up. So you often see foresters, when they regenerate an area, they just go through and they, have their dibble bar, and they can just plop, plop, plop all their little pines. And then we can't do that here. The deer love our trees. They eat pretty much everything we plant. Before I started, they said they planted some black gum out there, and they went back to go get tubes, and the hour that they were gone, they had already come through and nipped the black gum. They had already eaten the trees. It's like, that's crazy. So we have to protect our trees, so it is pretty labor intensive for these. We usually use 1 to 2 year old seedlings from Michigan native nurseries, and we plant them, and then we have to tube them, and we're using metal stakes. So, we have to pound those into the ground, make sure they're all stable, because these probably can't come off for a while. And that's another issue we're running into, is we don't want the trees to grow up, without creating their own structure, without being sturdy. But the issue is, once we take them off, now we're dealing with buck rub. So the way we're reforesting this area is we planted pines first, so kind of standard reforesting technique. You plant the pines, they get big, they kind of shade out a lot of the invasive species. We were hoping they'd start to shade out some of the buckthorn, some of the autumn olive, some of the, we have some garlic muster out there as well. And then you come in with the hardwoods, and then eventually the hardwoods catch up and you have a nice mixed forest. Well, our red pines, they were looking great, made it out of the line of the deer browse, and then we came back this spring and we lost a bunch to buck rub. So where they rub the felt off their antlers, and they've killed a lot of them. So now we have to tube the pine trees as well, which is a fun process. Jim was out there with us trimming them up and trying to fit. We had to figure out the best way to get them into the tubes, and I've been assured that they grow through the tubes, so we're excited about it. But now it's like you start looking around and everything looks like deer food. You're like, oh, we have to get that one and that one and that one. And now I'm looking at these we lost a basswood out there that was probably a good 6-inch diameter tree, and a buck rubbed it and killed it. And you're like, is there like a monster? Is there an elk out here or something? You know, you're just like, what is killing? So now we're looking at these medium-sized trees that we were almost, weren't even thinking of before, that we saved from the initial brush hogging. And now we have to put fencing up around those. So it's been a very labor-intensive process. Just a lot of things we're up against out in Tower Woods. But the good news is that this is only on about 15 acres of this 100-acre land preserve, and the rest of it is a gorgeous forest. It doesn't have that many invasives. We go through every once in a while and just kind of make sure we're knocking back any new things, but we see what the result will be in 50 to 100 years. So it's encouraging to us, but we run up against a lot of difficulties, and that's kind of where we start engaging the community is, oh yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry. I have a question about, do we have any working theories about how the invasive species got there or here or anywhere local?
There's, it kind of depends on what species it is. I believe buckthorn was a shrub-row. It has these they're not really thorns, it's just pointy branches that grow up, so they're very thick. You can plant them in rows. Garlic mustard was brought as an herb because of, it's in the mustard family. So, and then it got out of control. But basically these are non-native species, and we have a lot of non-native species, and most of them aren't classified, as invasive until they start creating these vast monocultures, and they just get this edge over our native species. So say it's this buckthorn with how quickly it grows and how quickly it can leaf out. I mean, the best time that we can go look for buckthorn and honeysuckle and autumn olive is in the early spring and late fall, where pretty much everything around here has lost its leaves, but they just have this edge where they keep their leaves just a little bit longer, get them a little bit sooner, so then we can go through and try to get them as fast as we can. But basically they were brought here mostly by humans, and for various reasons, hedgerows, an herb, but then they've just completely gotten out of control, decorative purposes, ornamental grass, that type of thing. So, yeah, Jim.
One of the invasives is autumn olive. The Michigan DNR thought that was wonderful wildlife habitat, and they were actually selling it for people to go out and plant on their properties. And so the autumn olive is all over too. We don't have that much here, I don't think. But another fun little thing, you ask, how did something like this buckthorn, how did the buckthorn get so predominant? I'll tell you the scientific name. Rhamnus cathartica. Now, when birds eat the seeds, what do you think happens? They're just going around spreading the seeds all over everywhere.
Wondering how are they doing?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they're prolific. I mean, they make a lot of those. They produce a lot of, quote, berries, and the birds eat a lot of them. And
That actually brings me to another question I had for a few minutes. Do we, the royal we, right?
Is there seeding sexual
When we go take them out, do we take into consideration what he exactly just said? They're, seeding, they're flowering, they're like, can we get them before the birds get them?
Yes.
So that way we're, killing two birds.
Yeah, two birds with one stone, yeah. Yeah, we definitely,
One chop and, a few
Yeah.
birds, right?
there may be ways to prevent the flowering, but that'd be difficult too.
yeah, but we try to get to them before berries. So right now is actually a good time. They are showing berries now, but usually August, and we want to wait. It's hard. It's all about, we use a lot of herbicides to help aid us and, killing back the buckthorn, because if you cut them, they come back about 100-fold stronger. So you do have to use herbicides. So it's all around working against basically you're working against the buckthorn's biology. So during midsummer to early fall, they're kind of, wearing out their wearing out their energy. They're sending things back down into their roots to store for winter. So if we can hit them then they're going to take that back down into their roots and we can kill the root systems, which is really what we need to be doing. Most invasive shrubs are this way: honeysuckle, autumn olive, buckthorn. If you just go through on a cutting regime, you are not going to get rid of them. You're almost going to spurn them on. Yep. And then they're going to get more flowers, more berries. You're going to get more spreads. So it's all about timing, how we're best timing it. If you're using a foliar spray, obviously the best time is when they have all their energy up in their leaves, and you can try to kill them back that way. But so it's just basically trying to figure out the best way to mortally wound them.
Do we, just to follow through on that, how do we get rid of them if we want to truly get rid of them? Do we dig them up? Like, do we cut the ball, the root ball out of it so they can't regenerate? I mean, do we have any, to the bottom of the question kind of?
There is not
measures?
really a good mechanical way to remove a root system. They have very large spreading root systems, and this is just pretty much invasive species in general are very good at putting their energy out over large areas. They're very good at storing energy. I mean, I've seen at my last position, somebody cut back a buckthorn, he said he had been doing it for about 5 years in a row, and it just kept coming up. So they're very good at what they do. They're very good at storing energy and sprouting back up if you cut them. So there's not really a great way of mechanically removing, and then that also brings up, if you start disturbing the soil, you're bringing up a lot of seed. So it's almost better to try to just kill the roots and let the soil lie, and then you just kind of keep having to do it. And that's what we've been running into in Tower Woods. It's going to be another 5 years of hard treatment before we can start seeing the seed bank come back to more native species. And we obviously have to also propagate that because it hasn't seen native species for so long. And this is just a really odd example of just a parking lot. So you have to think a lot of those native seeds maybe weren't there, and now they've definitely been outcompeted because the buckthorn had so long to grow and propagate. So now we're fighting back the seed banks. So that's not always the case. Sometimes we can get out ahead of it, like I said, in the other part of the preserve where we can just go through and nip at them, as they're coming up. We don't really have to worry about them seeding as much out there coming back because they're not established in that seed bank. But areas like this that are highly disturbed, we just have to worry about, exhausting that seed bank.
Sure.
Yeah.
And one more question about native. Is there a particular point in time, like how far back do we go to determine what is actually native versus invasive?
Yeah, we usually, pre-settlement, pre-human settlement, we look at a lot of, what we do for these is before we did any of this, we hire somebody to go out and perform a survey. And what they do is they look at historical maps, they take soil samples, they kind of figure out they give us a picture of what was there before it was disturbed.
What year can we have a century?
1800s.
1800s.
Pre-humans, yeah, settlers, pre-industrious, where we're going through and clear cutting, and so they're going through, they're saying, okay, this was a hardwood forest, these are your soil types. In some areas, such as we have another one of our, which I'll get to, we have a farm, it was a centennial farm, and that actually probably wasn't a grassland at the point that they were looking at, but its current condition was so ideal for a grassland, and it would have taken so much to restore it. It was probably a forest, as most of this area was forest, that they actually suggested putting it more into a grassland prairie system. So it's kind of weighing the, we want to, make it as close to pre-settlement, disturbed as possible, but we also want to work with what we have. So we don't want to go in and try to make a centennial farm a forest if we're not going to get the right nutrients, if the soil's not right at that time, because it's just so disturbed that we can't. Luckily, Tower Woods actually has great soil for forest regeneration, so our trees are growing wonderfully. They're all popping out of the top of their tubes. We're seeing great growth rates out there. So the conditions are ideal. It's just kind of beating back some invasive species and some other issues that we're having.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
You seen any last year activity with the townships deer management program?
In the areas, yes. We are seeing less activity. In this particular preserve, we are not, but that's not one of the high target areas. But in the higher targeted areas, yes, we are seeing less, which is fortunate for our oak regeneration. I know they just did a really cool study out of Ann Arbor. I'd suggest everyone look at it. They did a deer management study on oak forest regeneration and how the deer, and they even looked at rabbit predation as well and small mammal, on the impact that it's having and how you need a certain percentage of oaks to survive. So this is our biggest problem at Lake Lansing North. We're just not getting any oaks that are making it past, I mean, they're about this tall and this wide. They just keep getting nipped down year after year. So they did a study on oak regeneration just to show that in these areas where these deer populations are out of control, we're not getting oak forest regeneration. We're not at the right recruitment percentage of volunteers to get the regeneration that we need. So it was interesting. We were excited that they were able to kind of confirm scientifically what we've been observing out in a lot of our areas, that we're just getting so much deer predation. There's so much pressure on the native trees that we're not seeing native natural reforestation. Any other questions on our reforestation projects?
Are there any small mammals or things like that that actually will eat the seeds in the sense of chewing them up as opposed to just swallowing them and then spreading them?
I'm not exactly sure on that. I know that studies have been done as far as, insects, but we have to be so careful with that type of work, seeing if anything can, pretty much, I think what you're asking is, is there something that kind of destroys them instead of just spreads the seed? Is
Right.
that kind of, yeah. And I don't know of anything. I don't think there's anything. I think it'd be real big news and everyone would be really excited. I know they've been studying various insects that might, eat these, but you just have to be so careful with that because you don't want a new invasive species. So
Right.
maybe they're researching a couple, but right now this is kind of the best option that we have.
Well, the purple loosestrife story started here, right?
Oh,
At
yeah.
MSU, right?
I think that was, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Purple loosestrife and the beetle to clobber it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't seen purple loosestrife around here in
No, there's not a
forever,
lot of
right?
it. No.
Don't see it. Don't see it.
Yeah, now we need a buckthorn one, we need a garlic
Exactly, right.
mustard one, yeah. And I know they've been doing a lot of studies with, emerald ash borer and the parasitoid wasps and that type of work. So, that type of work is so important for what we do. And as soon as any of those biological controls become available and, become safe to us, we're all on board with trying those and obviously after a lot of research, and we do host a lot of the, emerald ash borer studies in our parks, and we'd be completely up for somebody coming and releasing the garlic mustard eating insects, right? Yeah. I'll just run through just some real brief pictures here. These are just more kind of on the volunteer side, getting people engaged. So in Tower Woods, we always encourage, this is just a neighborhood effort. We had about 35 volunteers do 3 hours of very hard work. Like I said, it's not just planting trees. You have to drive these posts in the ground. You have to tube it. You have to tie the tubes. So we are very fortunate to have a lot of volunteers help with that. And you can see we have a lot of kids come out and help with that. And kids just love planting trees. There's just some connection between planting a tree and what, and you talk about, oh, when you're bigger, you can come and show your kids this tree. And kids just, it's just such an engaging thing for kids. They understand it. It's something, they're like, okay, I can come back and see this tree and I can bring my parents. So we encourage families to come out and we get a lot of work done. And, it's like, how much work can you do with volunteers? You can get a lot done. We planted 175 trees, tubed and staked within 3 hours. And you can see, we had all ages participate. So that was really exciting. We work with local school groups a lot. This is Murphy Elementary students. We had 90 students come out and plant some oak seedlings in Lake Lansing North, and we tubed them. That's the first time we've done any tubing at Lake Lansing North. Like I said, we're not seeing the oak regeneration that we want to. So we worked with that. We always are working working with teachers. We're trying to find partnerships to get kids out and engaged in nature, which is really important because then those kids carry that message with them. They get excited, they get out in nature. It's all about place-based learning. And we really encourage that and try to help with that as much as we can. And the teachers are always excited to bring their kids out into the land preserves and plant trees. We work with scout groups a lot. This is Cub Scout Troop 265 from Hazlitt. So they came out and they planted trees. It was pouring rain, but man, they planted some oak trees out there. And this is North Ridge Land Preserve. This is one that we actually, I believe, are going to contract out a lot of the work. I like to call it the Garden of Invasives. I've never seen that many invasive species growing. I was like, I need to like bring people out to I could block off like a 5 foot by 5 foot area and show you like 6 invasive species that I face on a daily basis. So some of the work is a little bit too much, we have 1,400 acres. So at some point we do have to start kind of contracting some of that work out. And that's something that I'm trying to do more of, is look for ways that we can use our stewardship plans that we've already gotten done. Like I said, when we acquire a new land preservation property, we need to do a stewardship report. So they go through, map it, kind of decide what the best way to restore it would be. And then maybe we can start using land preservation stewardship to hire people to go in and remove a lot of this without, having a Tower Woods thing where we just, at it every day and it just takes so much of your time. But it is a prevalent problem in our natural areas, are these invasive species. Yeah.
Who would you hire?
There are a lot of contractors out there, such as JF New, GEI, a lot of companies that do these native restoration projects. So we obviously do a bid process, we interview them, we'll go over their plans, check their references. But there are a lot of companies that do this type of work and kind of alleviate some of the pressure off of our volunteers. And then that's the thing, you kind of have to, when you can hire a company, you want to, and then you want to find ways to integrate families and school children and that to get them engaged, because we don't want to just be all over here with contractors and not talking about what we're doing. We want to make sure that we're doing things with contractors, we're getting a lot done, but we're also engaging the community, we're showing them how important this is. Just making sure that they understand why we're spending the money out there, that it's to protect and preserve, and everything that the land preservation program and park programs and pretty much Meridian Township stands for is protecting these very sensitive natural areas. So that's kind of our mission, is to get stuff done and then make sure everyone knows about it and get them engaged in it and talking about it.
Is there a way that you could describe whether, half of it is contracted out, half is volunteers, or is there like a regular, percentage that you're going for?
Right now, it's not as much contracted out. I'd say maybe even as low as 30% contracted work, and a lot of that right now is just things that we've already been doing. So the Tower Woods, to run those big cats out there, we contract that out. I'll get to a slide on our prescribed burning. We don't have a burn boss in the township that can conduct those prescribed burns, so we hire an outside company to do the burns, but then we can engage school children in the restoration of the grassland afterwards. So we are looking to maybe pick up a little bit more, but at the same time we want to be sure that we're not biting off more than we can chew, because like we see in Tower, you can't just cut everything down and leave it. Then you have to plant trees, you have to make sure that everything's not coming back up, all the buckthorn, all the autumn olives. So we're not going to bite off more than we can chew there, but we do need to kind of get some movement going on some major restoration projects. Any other questions? I think we're coming right to the end of the tree planting and tree forest restoration. So are there any questions in general on how we're engaging people to plant trees? Anything on forest regeneration? Good. Awesome. So we'll move on to our, one of my favorite preserves is the Davis Foster Land Preserve. It's right there off of Van Atta Road. This is a very large preserve, and it has one of the most unique ecosystems in the township. It's a restored native grassland. And this is a really fun preserve to manage, mostly because we get to use fire. Fire's fun. So we hire, like I said, we hire a company to come out and do these prescribed burns. farms. We have a plan about 10 years out of we burn on a rotational basis, and that is to help maintain grasslands. So pre-settlement, fire was a very natural part of these ecosystems. So a lot of our native species are very well adapted to fire, and a lot of them even need fire to kind of regenerate and, you know, do better than the non-native species. So the non-native species are just not as fire adapted. So when we can use it, fire is a very good tool for, keeping invasive species out, regenerating our grasslands, encouraging native plant growth. So we do that on a rotational basis. We have 4 areas out there that we rotate, so they get burned about every 2 to 3 years. We kind of go out, see how it's doing, decide if it is has too much thatch, if it's not looking like it's regenerating properly, and then we decide on a 2 or 3 year rotation. And they do a very controlled, it's very safe, very controlled burn. So these guys, this is what they do. So they go in, we help them burn mow breaks, the fire department's on the scene, and they basically burn it. So we have a lot of tall grasses out there, so the visuals, you can see on the pictures, the flames get pretty big, and what that does is it basically burns off the top layer. And the really cool thing about our native grasses is they have such deep root systems. They're amazing for erosion control. So, you know, they keep the soil in place so much better. My favorite graphic is one showing like the root system of, say, big blue stem to, you know, Kentucky bluegrass that we use in our lawns. You can just see how much better it is at adapted and keeps the soil in place than, say, ornamental grasses. So what they do is we burn the top layer off. That doesn't harm the grass at all. As I said, it kind of needs that fire to regenerate. And then afterwards, what we've been doing in our grassland is there's not a ton of forbs present, so flowering plants that, say, pollinators would enjoy. So what we've been doing is working with local students. Again, this is Murphy Elementary again. They came out and made seed balls, which was a new project we did. And it's native genotype seed. We're very strict on that. We want to make sure that it is seed from this area. It's native. We source from a local nursery, and then they make a little seed ball. We oil this kind of soil matrix that has the appropriate nutrients. They make a little ball, and then they throw it out into the grassland post-burn. So it's kind of creating some room for more forbs out there. And right now, we are not seeing a ton of that yet, but in another 2 or 3 years, because you have to think these prairie and grassland plants take a really long time to establish. You don't never really see like a showy first year grassland. So everyone's like, oh, where are the flowers? It's like it takes some time. So they're just started this project this year. We're doing it again, actually September 15th. We're working with the same group, and they're going to come out and seed the area that we burned earlier this year. So that's really exciting. But yeah, so we're encouraging these native forbs that will support pollinators. One of our biggest successes out at this grassland is the Audubon Society identifying the state endangered Henslow sparrow on one of their bird walks. They haven't identified it this year. I believe their walk got canceled or something happened, but we are still maintaining that area. So it's encouraging us and showing us that we are creating this very unique ecosystem that the state endangered bird, as well as many other grassland nesting birds, are using. So the grasshopper, sparrow, pheasant, turkey, we're encouraging all of these native birds that really need these grasslands to breed, to nest out there. So that was really exciting. Does anybody have any questions about prescribed burning, the benefits, or seed ball projects, which are really fun? We're also restoring a 7-acre prairie at another preserve, so that's really exciting. We're putting the forb seed down this year. So we're expecting some, we're trying our best to support our native pollinators and our native nesting birds. Yeah.
Ornamental, question in general, just in terms of ornamental grass, monocultures, which I could go into my soapbox on. Why, we put all this effort here, and yet, as a township, we have ordinances that actually prohibit the conversion, essentially, of lawn and monocultures into native grasslands, butterfly gardens, et cetera. Just as, I mean, on one hand, we put so much effort in terms of what you're doing. On the other hand, we prohibit.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, like I said, it's hard because, you see these showy gardens and these showy, what we think of as aesthetically pleasing. And what I see as aesthetically pleasing coming from my background is almost, it might be 100% different. So to me, a very diverse front yard with longer grasses and butterfly gardens and milkweed, that's to me is aesthetically pleasing. So I guess it's kind of,
As a township, we prohibit that.
yeah, and I think it's,
Doesn't make, and to me, it doesn't make any sense.
Who's that up to fix?
I don't know, maybe the Environmental Commission.
We get to do something good.
Yeah, and we have made, we made a few strides with encouraging a lot of our monarch gardens, our butterfly gardens, our pollinator areas, so maybe trying to encourage a little more native species planting. But it's hard. Like I said, this education component is so key, and community engagement, and just, maybe some people didn't understand the difference between, maybe some people look out at Davis Foster and say, man, someone needs to mow that. Like, why? So I think it's all about education. It's about showing, that, oh, well, we have these state endangered birds out here. We have monarch butterflies out here. We have all this beautiful wildlife that's using these areas so well. So maybe, just kind of changing the way people think. I think that's a great, great observation.
You mentioned the term prairie, and I'm curious what you mean by that, and if there is evidence that what you consider prairie existed during this pre-settlement period.
By prairie, ours is we technically have a grassland, so it's not technically a prairie. There's a lot of, differences. There's a lot of different variation, categories of even prairie. So like I said before, most of this area was forest, and this area probably, I know me and Jim Kilbasa have talked about this a few times during land preservation. They have the same discussion that maybe this was, at one point forest. So why are we maintaining it as this grassland? And as I said, the Centennial Farm, we got these, when they first decided to put it into this grassland, they decided that it was basically the best use of that land would be to put it into a grassland to help support these state endangered birds and state endangered nesting birds. So we had this area that was, easily converted into a grassland as opposed to trying to convert it back into a forest. We probably would have had to do some, breaking up some tiling. We would have had to restore. It would have been a very major project. So where we can do that, say in Tower Woods, where we can put it back to what it was, I think we do that. But, you have to kind of weigh what it was before with what it could be and what ecosystems we need in this area. And when they first put it into grassland, they decided that that was an ecosystem need.
Do we have a goal, as a township, do we have a goal of X percentage of the land being natural preserves, natural, land? Right now, I just did the calculate with what you said before, we've got about just under 7%. Is the goal 10? Is the goal to keep it what it is? Do we have some sort of goal?
I guess, do you want to answer it, Jim?
The land preservation system was first set up, the goal was to get, and maybe you can pull the numbers, but I think it was 600 to 800 acres of the best natural locations around the township. That wasn't based on any, I don't think it was on any percentage basis.
I think it was on.
I think it was what's
was
out
available.
there and what we might be able to obtain for the township. And that was a, quote, reasonable expectation that I think we've already reached and are hopefully going to go well beyond it. But we're just about to the end of what we can obtain, I think.
Yeah, so as Jim was saying, we're coming to the end of, say, the acquisition period. Now, they're always looking and they're always, reviewing properties, the land preservation program. because they want to obtain these sensitive natural areas. So when one becomes available, they still go through the ecological screening criteria. They still score it. That's a major part of the land preservation program is, the board goes out and they survey that area. They decide whether it'll fit in with what we currently have. So I think they're always looking for acquisitions, but we do, as you said, we have a large number, and a lot of them we need to kind of actively manage at this point. So again, we're balancing acquisition with management. We're not biting off more than we can chew as far as, making sure these natural areas aren't just weed patches, per se. They're, native thriving ecosystems.
And that is one of the hardest things, because just what you saw there at the Tower Woods, the amount of money that has gone into that just to try to defeat the buckthorn. If we had very many other properties with other similar problems, we'd blow whatever budget we could get. So we've got to somehow work with what we can do. And I think we're doing a pretty good job here in the township. Again, without any particular percentages or any goal like that, but just try to pick off the best available possible places for land preserves.
Question on how we pick them. Do we pick something that's in preferably better shape, or is our criteria to pick something that's in potentially worse shape? I mean, it's more work for us, but overall the percentage of improvement would be greater. The greater good would be greater. I don't know.
If I
How do
answer
we-
and say yes,
Yes to everything.
yes, to everything, any
Okay.
and all, if somebody came in and said, I've got this wonderful pristine
Okay.
20 acres, I'd like to give it to the township.
Thank you.
Good deal. But if it's that pristine and that's nice, we found that it's costly. So if we can obtain that, and I think we've talked in here about, there's one property at Ponderosa that I think we're on the verge of being able to close that with state assistance. That's a beautiful place, but it also is not pure and pristine. But it will be a very useful addition. So, and as you can see, the amount of money that has to go into some of these, we don't have that kind of budget.
Right.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on. I just put this in real quick, kind of what we do in our park systems. I do the same thing in our natural areas of our parks. Like I said, a lot of people think of parks as, the slides and the swing sets and the pavilions, but most of our parks are natural area. So what we do what I do in the parks is very similar to what I do in the land preserves. To me, there's almost no divide. You have like your natural areas, so I maintain those natural areas. Now they're governed by different ordinances, there's different rules, but we still do all the invasive species work, we still map, we still monitor. In the parks, we also, parks are a little easier to engage say citizen stewards in, so especially with large groups, you have the convenience of a bathroom, of a parking lot. So to kind of get, those first time volunteers out, and then maybe I can convince them to go bushwhack through Tower Woods at some point, but we do this Love a Park Day, which is kind of sprucing up all of our parks for the coming season. And like a lot of this is garlic mustard removal. It's going through, planting flowers. We make sure to do native flowers. So I threw that in there just to show kind of what we're also doing in our park systems, as well as these major projects in our preserves. One of my favorite projects in a park is our Hartrick Monarch Garden. This is a certified monarch way station through Monarch Watch. And this is, it's just a great project. So we have 90 students from Bennett Woods Elementary, and for now 2 years in a row, they have come and planted native pollinator-friendly plants as well as milkweed plants to support the monarch butterfly in this nice little strip along the drive of Hartrick Park. And it it is a gorgeous garden. We have a lot of flowering plants, coneflower, black-eyed Susan. We put a couple of annuals in there, such as zinnia, to give some nectar right off the bat to the monarchs. And we've even had one of our volunteers goes out there, Dave Rajkowski, and he monitors monarch, if they're laying eggs. He sends me pictures of eggs and caterpillars, and he gets so excited about them. So this is definitely one of my favorite projects. The students walk down from Bennett Woods Elementary, so we don't even have to use buses. And then Chippewa Middle School grows a lot of the plants that we're using in this garden. So the Chippewa Middle School in their greenhouses, again, Dave Rajkowski does a lot he collects seed. He kind of, we're helping give recommendations for what native plants we want to see in the garden. And then the Chippewa Middle School students grow them. So it's really exciting because we're using, the plants that were grown at Chippewa Middle School, and then the students from Bennett Woods Elementary are walking down the street to come plant them in this, beautiful, prominent monarch garden. So it's kind of our way, it's a lot of our land preserves, say Tower Woods, it's kind of hard to get back. The trails aren't paved. They're not, high traffic areas. So anywhere where we can do these, more display areas. Now, obviously they're supporting the wildlife, maybe not as much as the 7-acre prairie, but anywhere where we can show these display areas, maybe getting more to your point about education on these are really important native plants, start using more natives in your gardens and your lawns around your homes. So anywhere where we can put these display gardens and also engage 90 students in, a stewardship project, that's really, it's definitely been one of my favorite projects, and we're going to keep, putting more flowers in along there, a lot of the monarch-friendly variety. Yeah.
Quick question as a homeowner. If I want to buy native plants, can I just go to any store, or do I need to go somewhere special, like a nursery? How would I go about that?
I would definitely suggest doing some research online about our native plants. The Meridian Garden Club hosts a wonderful native plant sale where we have a couple people that we actually get wholesale from come out and sell. So there are a lot of native plant nurseries. Designed by Nature is one, Wild Type is one in this area. Now, they're a little more expensive than, say, if you went down to Kroger and bought some some annual non-natives or such, but they are very valuable. A lot of them are perennials. So I always love black-eyed Susan. I love the purple coneflower. I love those varieties. They're hardy. They don't take a lot of care or fuss. You kind of just put them in the ground and away they go. They're really well adapted. So yeah, you can definitely do research. You can talk to anybody. You can give me a call and I'll set you up with some. The Meridian Garden Club. Yeah, they do a great job with their native plant sale, or you can get them direct from the nurseries around here. Yeah. Any other questions about our monarch garden? Again, monarch butterfly, just real quick, the numbers have been declining, so these way stations are very important to support their annual migration. So in your backyards, plant pollinator-friendly species. So again, the monarch butterfly it's just this iconic bright orange butterfly that everyone knows and loves, but by putting these display gardens in for the monarch butterfly, we're also supporting our native bee populations. We're supporting all the other skippers and butterflies and insects. So, there really are these great benefits to doing these kind of iconic species gardens, and we got a donation of milkweed from Monarch Watch to help us start it, and hopefully we can keep doing that program and helping the monarch butterfly populations.
Does butterfly bush count as a native?
Yep.
Okay.
That's a good one. Yeah, and there's a lot of, swamp milkweed is I think one of the most beautiful flowers. It's got a bright pink bloom, very pretty flower. We have a couple right over here in our historical village. We have a pollinator buffer garden that features a lot of these native plants that I've been talking about. And the reason we have that pollinator buffer there is for the ponds. So a lot, like I was saying, a lot of our native plants have these very deep root systems, and they do a much better job of filtering, anything coming off of a lawn. So, a lot of these are used in bioswales, they're used in rain gardens, they're used in these areas to help filter water. So they just have all of these amazing benefits. It's like the more and more you read about them, you're like, man, I should plant these everywhere. I just want to throw black-eyed Susans and coneflower, milkweed everywhere. So really exciting. Any other questions? We're kind of coming to the end of what I have today. I have a last slide, kind of calling some volunteers. We have a lot of fun. You can become a citizen steward with us. You just need to get in contact with me. We do a lot of different projects. Right now, I'm able to cater a lot of projects. So say a Boy Scout troop calls me, they have 10-year-olds, I can easily match them with a project I have. If I have some, NHS students at the high school call and they want to get some real work done, I have something for them. So families, so I'm able to really kind of cater my volunteer projects to the age groups right now. So it's really a great time to get in contact if you want to come volunteer with us. We have some regular work days in our neighborhoods that are really kind of growing, and we're excited to kind of keep that all going. So that's kind of my last little slide, is come volunteer with us.
For children, what's your lower range, age-wise, for them to actually, behave and, participate?
In one of my favorite pictures in this presentation is a mother with, she had, I believe, 1.5-year-old, 2-year-old, like on her back, and obviously they weren't doing very much, but they love being outside, they love being engaged. So really, as far as like school children and who I work with, the teachers are just wonderful partners. So I can work with, we worked with kindergartners in our monarch planting, and we actually had, we had kindergartners, first graders, second grader, third graders. We can work with a lot of groups because, especially in classrooms or in these family situations, because we have enough adults to be able to, make sure they're doing the right thing. So Monarch Garden's an easy, younger children activity. Seed balls, I believe, could be, I've done it with 5th grade students. So it's really about finding ways to engage them. And, you might not get the work done if you hired a contractor, but it's the impact you're having on the community and showing the community what you're doing by, engaging them in these stewardship activities. So yeah, all ages, pretty much.
Is preschool part of your all ages, or is that a little wild?
I don't have a lot of preschool teachers contact me, but I've definitely had parents bring their preschool age children out to the projects, and they've done wonderful. They probably can't stay the whole 3 hours, but they come, they help plant, they get their hands dirty. I don't think you can, just start kids young with this appreciation and this love of nature. That's how I feel like a lot of nature loving, you kind of, it's instilled at a very young age. So I'm all about that.
I think I've reported here being out at Tower Woods when you were spraying the trees with, what's that called again?
Oh yeah, plant skid.
Plant skid, which is basically animal blood.
Yes.
And the Cub Scouts love that.
Yes, that was one of my first projects. I was really nervous about
They get to spray
it.
this blood around.
Yeah.
They really got into that. As long as it was none of our blood.
Yeah. It's a deer repellent, and it was one of my first projects. It was like a couple weeks after I started, and I go to Luann, and I'm like, I really want to do this project with these Cub Scouts, and we want to go spray some trees with some blood to keep the deer off of them. And she was like, okay, let's do it. So,
and how
how
old are Cub Scouts?
I believe at that point, I've been working with that group for a long time. I think at that group, 7 or 8, yeah. And they keep coming back. That's that Cub Scout Troop 265. They keep coming back. So that was a really fun project.
But did it work?
Yeah,
It works pretty well.
It works pretty well. We are seeing some predation on our white pines. This is in Tower Woods. We did this, but it's an organic product. It comes as either it's dehydrated and then rehydrated, and you can do the rehydration or you can buy it in a bottle. I believe Vernal sells it, or you can buy it online. I buy it online, and it's a powder mixture, and you just rehydrate it. And the best part is it's good for about 6 months, as opposed to a lot of other deer repellents, and a lot of other deer repellents have a lot of harsh chemicals, a lot of harsh smells. So obviously when working with 7 and 8-year-old Boy Scouts, I don't want to, expose them to harsh chemicals, harsh smells. I don't want that. So it's an all organic product. I was actually just talking to one of the owners of Plant Skid, and he's telling me it's allowed to be used on organic farms. You can actually, put it on organic produce. So it's a really great product. And we've seen some predation on our white pines, but our red pines that we, kind of doused with it, we didn't see any predation. It was mostly buck rub, which even that was curtailed by the standards around the township with that product. Yeah, so I would recommend it.
Interesting.
If there's no other questions, I'd like to press you just a little bit more on the issue of natives and non-natives. And you responded earlier that there's a sort of notional cutoff at settlement, by which I take European settlement is what we're talking about. And I get the feeling that there's sort of a set of species that are sort of generally considered native in this area and others that are not. Then you mentioned site assessment, where you get information on what species probably would have thrived in that area. So I'm a little unclear on, is there a sort of a fixed list, or is it a very site-based thing? And then I'll tell you why I'm asking the question.
Okay. From what I have learned and from what I have read in these site assessments, it is more site-based. Like I said, the grassland part, but I mean, our native species are pretty set, and our invasive species, you know, we're able to map those a little better. We also take into account, say, the northern ranges of some of our species. So one of my favorite trees, I'm from southern Ohio, is a tulip poplar. Yellow poplar, and they this is their very northern range, but I'll tell you what, they are doing wonderfully out in Tower Woods. So we also have to take, you know, climate change and that type of, you know, shift into consideration when we're, you know, deciding what to plant in our area. So I'd say it's a lot of both, really. It's, you know, we're using these site assessments that are conducted by these companies, and we're trying to, you know, do the best with what we have.
Okay. I guess part of my concern is that it's easy to get into a way of thinking that there's a set of species that are alien and don't belong, and even, you know, have these oils that hurt other plants and maybe even themselves. And then there's these wonderful sort of natives with their deep roots in the place, and I think we want to think a little bit about that rhetoric and how that works into some other discussions that are going on these days. And the more we're explicit about how we come to decide what types of ecosystems we believe were here at certain points of time and what types of ecosystems we think should be here, right? So maybe there wasn't much grassland before, but we feel like it's important to support monarchs, so we'll create a garden that supports them. That's a different logic than they were necessarily here before Europeans had a big impact on the landscape. And that's perfectly fine. That's why we have land preservation advisory boards that make those kinds of judgments. I think the more explicit we can be about those choices that we're making, and that they're choices and they're not just sort of given, the stronger those decisions will be, and the less we sort of run the risk of taking arbitrary decisions as somehow natural. Overall, the township's land preservation program, as far as I know, is, if not unique, highly unusual and obviously hugely successful. So I'm always needling Jim about pristine and native and natural, but I personally strongly support the program. If I had been around when it was created, I would have called it preservation and restoration, but that's what the millage got called, and it's going to be a lot of trouble to, maybe next time when we renew the millage, we can call it restoration or creation or something else. And
Restoration might be a catchy word.
It is.
it could be equally fraught, because again, you're trying to restore something to something you're not quite sure what it was.
It's a win.
But what's happening is a purposeful management of these lands in the public interest, and with ecosystem services in mind, and that's a great thing. So.
And I guess we could go all the way back and say we want to restore it to post-glacial.
Now, which eon? No. Well, thank you so much again for coming and sharing this with us. It's really interesting, and we really appreciate your efforts.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Actually, I did have one more question.
Nope, too late. I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. Since this just died, you get to ask another question, but you got to run the rest of the meeting. No.
Go ahead. Only that, of course, there are sort of boundaries between private property and public property, and as, let me just say, one sometimes encounters with one's neighbors. You know, maybe we're trying to get rid of our weeds or trying to control our invasives or whatever, but there's a huge reservoir just across the line, just across the fence line, whatever it is. Are there ways that the township can or does attempt to address those sort of reservoirs of essentially ongoing cost, if you want to put it in those terms?
Yeah, so, you know, we do, like I said, these land preserves, they're not all together in one big blob. You know, they're in people's backyards. We have issues with yard waste is a big one. People dumping, you know, brush cuttings, lawn cuttings back in our preserves.
Fragments of whatever, all these invasive things.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, as well as, you know, lawn chemicals and that sort of thing. So like I've kind of been saying, you know, education is key. We try to go through, you know, the Meridian Monitor, through Facebook, through social media, through our website to try to educate neighbors of these natural areas that, you know, yard waste dumping isn't healthy for our native area, for these ecosystems, that, you know, putting, you know, all these chemicals on your lawn, it's draining. And then you know, we have a lot of our volunteers come and they're like, you know, I pull garlic mustard every single year in my lawn, but, you know, my neighbors refuse to pull the garlic mustard.
Right.
So then it's kind of them, you know, educating their neighbors, or a couple people on our land preservation board have gone to their HOA, their condo associations, and been like, hey, you know, these areas that we co-own together, you know, the condo association areas, we have a major garlic mustard infestation. And I've actually gone and, you know, written a couple letters and talked about, you know, why it's bad, and kind of, you know, trying to slowly change people's mind that these are really big issues and that we need to be addressing them. So, you know, really education is key. We're always looking for new ways to do outreach, whether that's social media, you know, getting mailings out. We send letters to the preserve neighbors a lot, just kind of encouraging them, you know, to become citizen stewards, and also tucking information in there about, you know, why yard waste dumping is bad, why we're fighting these invasives, why planting natives is good. So, you know, education is just key, and getting people engaged is key, because maybe they didn't even know that, you know, some people say, oh, well, it's brush, why can't I put it in a natural area? You know, it's all about education and, you know, creating that line with the neighbors. So we try to do that as best we can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All good? Awesome, thank you.